Hello, Dark Reader! Welcome to the Dark Side of the Library podcast. I'm your host, Katie. I am really excited to talk about The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kiste. I just finished it, actually, and I am really pumped to tell you about it. First, though, before we begin the podcast episode, I just want to invite you to our socials and to check out our show notes. We do have affiliate links there, so if you do purchase something, we get a tiny commission, but it does help the podcast out, and we appreciate y'all for doing that, those that have already. And it would be awesome if you could go rate and review over on your favorite listening app or to follow us here on YouTube. So I picked this one up really fast. I was actually shocked. I think I was like the first person on my library list to get the book, but I devoured this book in easily a day. It was a pretty awesome. I enjoyed the novel quite a bit. I thought it was really entertaining. It was lighter than some of the books that I've read lately, and it was just a good horror novel. It was a good ghost story. It was pretty nice. I picked it up originally because somebody was like, oh, it's similar to Jeff Vandermeer's Annihilation, and I don't get that at all. I'm actually, to me, I don't think that's actually the case. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, especially since The Haunting of Velkwood is such a character-driven story versus, I feel like Annihilation made the characters really ambiguous for the most part. Anyway, I won't get into that too much. So for those of you that haven't heard of The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kiste, I'm going to talk about the summary or read off the summary that's on Amazon real fast. I will share with you who Gwendolyn is and then my thoughts about the book and just a little bit of a breakdown. All right, so this is a novel that came out March 5th of 2024. So seriously, not that long ago, so I'm not surprised if a whole bunch of people haven't read it quite yet. I gave this about a 4 out of 5 star. I really enjoyed it. This is about 3 childhood friends who miraculously survive the night everybody in their suburban hometown turned into ghosts. So they call this the Velkwood vicinity. It's a topic of occult theorists, tabloid, 1-hour documentaries, pseudoscience investigations, all kinds of people. The story is that blocks of homes disappeared behind a near impenetrable veil that only 3 survivors can actually go through, which are the 3 friends, Talitha, Brett, and Grace. They're the only ones who are seemingly allowed through in this place. And only one of them has done that in the past 20 years until now. Talitha has avoided anything to do with this circumstance that took her mom and her 8-year-old sister away, essentially. She's gone from one job to the next job. She doesn't really settle anywhere or with anybody. She's pretty lost. She's floating. She doesn't have a whole lot of drive. You can tell that she's severely depressed as well. For the most part, she feels like she is trapped by her past, as if she's still there in that hometown that she desperately wanted to escape from before that event actually happened. So a new researcher named Jack tracks her down and offers to pay her to go back to the vicinity. So Talitha just claims that she's doing it for the money, but eventually as we go through the novel, you'll realize there's a lot more to it. Of course there is. Of all the crackpot theories over the years, no one has discovered what actually happened the night that Talitha and her estranged former best friend Brett and Grace escaped their homes 20 years ago. Will she finally get the answers she's been looking for all these years, or is this just another dead end? Too Long Didn't Read version is that this is a suburban ghost story about a small town that trapped 3 young women who must confront the past if they want to even have a future. Sounded great. I haven't read a ghost story in quite some time. I actually think Ghost Eaters is my last true ghost story I've read in a while. I could be wrong, but that's the one that I remember, at least, because I'm going to remember that book forever. Anyway, so who is Gwendolyn Kiste? Gwendolyn is a prolific writer. She's done a lot of different short stories, especially, and she's won 3 Bram Stoker awards. Some of the books that she's written are The Rust Maidens, Reluctant Immortals, and Her Smile Will Unether the Universe. Pretty Mary's all in a row. lots of different books here. She's a horror author. You can check out more about Gwendolyn Kiste in our description down below on YouTube. She originally is from Ohio. She resides on an abandoned horse farm outside of Pittsburgh with her husband, a cat, and not nearly enough ghosts. But apparently she at least has some. Or is she saying she has none? I don't know. The possibilities are endless. And again, you can follow her on her socials. We have listed those down in the description below. I highly recommend it. She's pretty great. So let's talk about how I feel about this novel. I really enjoyed it. I thought this was a solid book, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I want to start off by saying, if you are a person that is just getting into horror novels and you somehow stumble upon this YouTube channel, I think that this is actually a really great starter ghost story book for those that aren't familiar with the horror genre in general. I just think it's a really solid book. The writing, I feel like, is pretty good. Of course, there are some plot holes, and we'll get into that in just a second, but it's atmospherically pretty great. It's not too intense. It's not too disturbing. It's pretty low-key, in my opinion, but who knows what's going on up here. And it has a really good, I would say, old school approach to ghost stories. So I've noticed a lot of the time that ghosts in some of the newer novels seem to be like this really big bad, or this thing that needs to be defeated, almost like a djinn, like let's shove it back in its bottle, that sort of thing. Gwendolyn has brought the old school laying people to rest trope back into the fold, but in such a multifaceted way that it talks about the whole spectrum of time, and not only the effects of the ghost itself, but the people currently alive and the system there. And granted, that's quite a bit to unpack, but I think Gwendolyn has simplified it and made just a great story and presented it to us. And I really appreciate it. I think it's just a very good story generally. It's also one of my favorite things about novels, because even though we have tropes galore, which is fine, I love that we have a very character-driven novel. And this applies especially to our 2 protagonists here, which is Talitha, she's the main protagonist, but her best friend, or ex-best friend, not really ex-best friend, but somebody that is more estranged, her best person, Brett. They have a very strong character development in this novel, and you get a full spectrum of just their humanity and their relationship with each other, the relationship that they have with their past, their ghosts, and just how they developed over time. It's very interesting, and it feels real and very authentic. So I appreciate how Gwendolyn Kiste has created this really great, not only story, but these very relatable characters, and we can identify with bits of them and maybe even feel for what drives them. So all in all, it's a great ghost story. If you're not somebody that has read a lot of ghost stories, I do recommend this one. So let me get into the things that I really enjoyed. Again, I thought the atmosphere was really great. There was a lot of terminology that was used in Talitha and Brett's current day situation that tied into their past and to the ghosts themselves, which I thought was really great. Just the language that was used really amplified the feelings here, and just not just the horror factor, but also some of the longing that we experience with both Brett and Talitha, the sadness, the depth, and the guilt, and the shame. All of those things are very prevalent in this book, and I feel like Kiste does such a good job drawing all of those things in, and makes you really feel and experience, and utilizes all of the senses, but doesn't go over the top. So I really loved just the feel there. The pacing was excellent too. For the most part, it was pretty steady and a little slow, but I thought it was just I think the pacing was kind of perfect. And even when we escalate to the peak of the conflict, it was a steady uphill, not a surge of adrenaline, but it was like, okay, we're getting closer. And, you know, you get really excited. And even just like the resolution felt like, all right. It didn't feel like a phew, all the way up and then plummet down. It was just a perfectly paced book, in my opinion, especially for a story that feels like it is filled with dread and sadness, and the pacing fit that sort of vibe for the book. This book is LGBTQ plus friendly, especially for somebody in the LGBTQ community. I really related to a lot of these feelings. There's a lot of longing, and this is not a spoiler necessarily. You can see pretty early on that the relationship between Brett and Talitha is a lot deeper than friendship. There's definitely this love and longing and desire to be with each other, but the timing was never right. And it fit. And unfortunately, I've been seeing a lot of like forced weird relationships in a lot of newer books, but this one actually fits quite well. We have some trigger warnings here, so like child abuse and neglect and etc. and bigotry. So one of the things is when we're talking about this character-driven story is we have Brett. She comes from a family with a stepfather that is abusive, and it is a story as old as time. But Brett, in her adult life, is very sure of herself. She does not want to be a part of this Velkwood community anymore. She wants to separate herself from her house. She never wants to come back. She knows who she is, and she gives a lot of patience and space to like Talitha, who seems she's not really sure where she stands. She doesn't know how she feels with her mom. Like, she feels like her mom hates her, but she doesn't know why. She feels a lot of things towards Brett, but she is like very lost or confused a lot of the time, and it feels very in the middle of being a part of this neighborhood in Velkwood versus like trying to create a future for herself. So Kiste does a really great job with those two narratives together, because I know so many people, and this doesn't just apply to the queer community, but this applies to people, and this also includes me, but like having chosen family versus sticking with your blood relatives. Like, there are a lot of themes here that are really vital and totally relatable to many, many people out there. So one of my cons, speaking of character-driven stories, is that we have a lot going on with Talitha, our protagonist, and Brett, but we have a lot of these side characters, including our third person that was able to escape the suburban ghost town, which is Grace. We only get so much about Grace, and then we have another character that comes in a little later called Enid, and she is actually very pivotal in the story as well. But Grace and Enid don't get as much depth as Brett and Talitha. I wish there was more, but honestly, I can overlook some bits of it because I really felt like Brett and Talitha were just such a relatable pair and interesting characters to watch and see how they developed, that I did overlook some of the other side characters, including like Brett's family, Talitha's family. But that's one of the reasons why I did give it a lower star, was because there were so many characters that I really wanted to know more about. Haunting of Velkwood is really cool because, kind of like the Netflix Hill House, it kind of explores time, but in a very vague way, with like past, present, and future. But it's not time itself, it's just like the attached feelings. It's tethered together, but it's also a mirror. So this is where I'm gonna just issue a spoiler warning just in case. Please go read Haunting of Velkwood. I think it's a fun read. It's lighter ghost story, but we're going to get into some maybe spoilers or just a little more depth of the novel. I'm not going to spoil some of the big stuff, of course, in the novel, but I want to go in depth more on this whole like going into ghost land and living in the present, etc. So when Talitha goes back to Velkwood, they are stuck in a time like loop. They're like in the same period of time before shit hits the fan, essentially. And every time Talitha goes and visits the place, the more tethered she becomes to the past, but she also gets to see and witness kind of like the same events unfolding. But Talitha is an interesting character because she has not been able to grow or move past this particular event. So the past actually still, regardless of her going back and reliving this experience, she has been doing that the whole time. She lives in guilt and shame throughout the entire book and feels like this longing to basically come face to face with her past again, which becomes a bit like a mirror. Versus somebody like Brett, who's just been wanting to leave and escape and just be done with her past this whole time and move forward. And that isn't necessarily healthy either, because when Brett comes back, it becomes apparent that Brett also hasn't moved on from some of the events that unfolded in Velkwood. It's an interesting exploration of like how we cope with a lot of things in our life, especially like big events, including like death, loss, family dynamics. There are a lot of things presented and how each person might approach their past and what that might look like. The more I sit with this book, the more I enjoy it, especially for me personally. My family has gone through a lot. We've experienced a lot of death in our family, for instance, and there's a lot of familial trauma that's just echoed over the course of generations. And then there's the future and how to create and make a better future for not just you, but also for the people that are within that line of familial trauma, and finding ways of helping navigate those feelings of shame and guilt and the past as well. So I really liked that book because of those themes. They feel really relatable. I really related to Talitha and Brett. I almost feel like I've been both of those people at some points in my life, trying to navigate what really works for me and how I face the future, the present, and the past. And I really appreciated how this book was wrapped up and how it finished. Even though there were some plot holes, and even though part of me is like, I still don't know what happened. You know, like some parts I'm like, wait a minute. I had to overlook some bits of it. I enjoyed just the overall themes that were presented, learning about identity, and using a ghost story to explore those sorts of things is really great. And also laying certain things to rest. Just a beautiful metaphor for kind of things that we have to do. We have ghosts in our past. Everybody does. We have ghosts in our past that sometimes we just have to let go of or move on from. And we need to stop going back and visiting. But we also do need to face them and come to terms with the situation at hand. So I really enjoyed The Haunting of Velkwood by Gwendolyn Kiste. I'm going to check out some of her other works probably a little later, but this was a really great new read. I haven't read a ton of new stuff this year, so I wanted to present that to y'all for 2024. If you do want to learn about new horror novels that are coming out every single month, my co-host Carrie and I tend to do a episode every Wednesday where we curate all of the spooky books that are coming out. That includes adult fiction, kids books, nonfiction, and you can add them to your TBR. Make sure to join us on our socials at Dark Side of the Library. You can find that in the description down below if you are watching on YouTube. And if you do like our channel, please like, subscribe, and let other people know about Dark Side of the Library. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I hope you all have a fantastic weekend and you read so many awesome novels. We'll see you next time.